It is a pleasure and a privilege for us to welcome Senior Oscar Arias, the very well-known Central American statesman, a world figure, a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, twice elected president of Costa Rica, and a man who has developed this whole concept of nations without armies. There's no army in Costa Rica, one of the few nations that doesn't have any army at all. It's a green nation. And what he has done in Central America was virtually a miracle, because the 5 countries there were all in turmoil, rather like our SAARC countries are now. And maybe we need an Arias to settle the problems that we have in this area. And he was able to sort that out. And now, of course, he's well known and travels around the world. He is here on behalf of 2 organizations. One is the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, at whose invitation Senora Arias and Senora have come here. And the second is this Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, which, as I was explaining, is the national memorial to Jawaharlal Nehru, because that is where Jawaharlal Nehru worked and lived for 17 years. You are visiting the museum after this lecture, and that is the second organization. So I would first of all ask somebody from the Deepa Bhatnagar, from the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, to formally welcome the distinguished guest.
Respected Honorable Dr. Karan Singh Ji, Member of Parliament, President of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, and Chairman of Executive Council of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, His Excellency Dr. Oscar Arias Sanchez, former President of the Republic of Costa Rica and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Shri Dinkar Asthana, Deputy Director General, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Dr. Oscar Arias to our institution, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, which stands as the national memorial to Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, an eminent statesman, and one who strived for world peace. We are grateful to His Excellency Dr. Arias, who has contributed immensely to world peace, to speak in our institution on the subject at the dawn of the century of reason. I warmly welcome His Excellency to our institution. We are grateful to our chairman, Honorable Dr. Karan Singh Ji, who has agreed to chair and conduct the proceedings of this important lecture. I warmly welcome him also.
I am the host, you don't have to welcome me.
No, so please be that. I welcome all those present here who have come here for this lecture in response to our invitation. Yeah. Thank you very much.
In fact, these flowers should go to the lady. So no. Sure. Yes, I'll just call upon. Yeah, I now have pleasure in inviting Dr. Oscar Arias to deliver his lecture on a very interesting topic, at the dawn of the century of reason. You, sir.
My friends, I recently came across these words from your great poet, Rabindranath Tagore, written just under 100 years ago. Who are you, reader? Read my poems 100 years hence. I cannot send you one single flower from this wealth of the spring, one single streak of gold from yonder clouds. Open your doors and look abroad. From your blossoming garden, gather fragrant memories of the vanished flowers of 100 years before. In the joy of your heart, may you feel the living joy that sang one spring morning, sending its glad voice across 100 years. 100 years is a very short time in human history. However, if our grandparents had met when the poet wrote those words at the dawn of the 20th century, imagine how different that meeting would have been from our gathering here today. Their respective cultural backgrounds and habits would have given them the mutual impression that they were with exotic and strange beings belonging to a distant land impossible to picture. Much of their attention would have been concentrated on the limitations that geography imposed on the relations between our countries. The vastness of the oceans that separate India and Costa Rica place our nations in entirely different worlds, connected only by a few thin threads of commercial relations that were barely beginning. Who are you, reader? Asked the poet. Imagine his surprise if his question could have been answered. I imagine his surprise if he could have seen that I have flown in relatively few hours over the not so immense seas that separate us. Compared to our ancestors, I am familiar with your culture and you with mine. Few Costa Ricans, perhaps, will have the privilege of seeing with their own eyes the glories of the Taj Mahal, but they can see the films and hear the music and read the poetry of this great civilization almost as easily as they can see and hear and read their own. Each year, an increasing number of visitors from India comes to see the rainforests and beaches of my beautiful homeland, and any lover of Latin American literature in India can access the novels of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the verses of Octavio Paz. Thanks to the marvels of technology, I bring no news from my part of the world that you could have not obtained on your own before my arrival. As has been said many times, we are now part of a global village, neighbors rather than strangers. And yet, not even the changes I have mentioned can take away the wonder I feel at being able to join you 10,000 miles from my home to speak for the first time in the great nation of India. They cannot take away the astonishment I feel as a person who, many years ago, studied the life of Jawaharlal Nehru far away as a student of political science in Costa Rica, and has now been honored with your invitation to deliver a lecture that bears his name. Our meeting here is, to me, a remarkable thing. After all, I come from a country of 5 million souls to this mighty nation of 1.2 billion. I come from a country of fewer than 20,000 square miles to this nation more than 64 times that size. I come from the oldest continuous democracy in Latin America to the most populous democracy in the entire world. I have also come here today to a country that is on the vanguard of a new generation of world leadership. I fully agree on this point with the scholar Kishore Mahbubani, who was one of the first and most vocal proponents of the argument that the 21st century will be the century of Asia. I have made this point many times in my own region, and I believe it is now accepted as conventional wisdom. For years, I have urged Latin American leaders and thinkers to study more closely the accomplishments of Asia and the ways in which we might learn from certain aspects of your success. There are many different estimates of the number of engineers India graduates every year. I recently read that this country is graduating as many as 1.5 million engineers per year, while in Latin America, from Mexico to Argentina, that figure does not reach 150,000. To put this another way, for every person in Latin America, this country has 2, but for every Latin American engineer, this country has 10. This is a symptom of a terrible problem. Speaking in general terms, Latin American universities are more concerned with ideological disputes that have not been relevant since the fall of the Berlin Wall than with forming the professionals our countries need to move into the developed world. We're also far behind in creating the infrastructure we need to move into the 21st century. We have been adapting at a glacial pace to the new international context, while India and other Asian nations have proven their ability to adapt quickly and strike while the iron is hot. The people of Uruguay have a joke. If you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, move to Uruguay immediately, because everything happens 20 years later there. This little piece of comedy reflects a sad reality in much of my region. Of course, this reality makes me all the more proud of what Costa Rica has achieved. A Costa Rican born 30 years ago, let alone a Costa Rican born when Tagore wrote his poem 100 years ago, has seen astonishing progress. When I was just 8 years old, my country became the first in history to abolish its army voluntarily and declare peace to the world. It invested in education and infrastructure and opened its doors to foreign trade, all while maintaining our commitment to democracy and equality. But we have much left to do, and we are part of a region that, by and large, has not proved up to the challenge that the globalized world presents. If we are to take advantage of the opportunities that the 21st century offers us, we must take a page from the playbook in Asia. And we must look to the East for lessons in how that can be done. We must also look to the East for new leadership on some of the greatest challenges facing humankind. So today, I have also come here to turn to India as a potential leader of the changes I believe must take place during the coming 100 years. For I certainly hope that the 21st century will be remembered not only as the century of Asia. I hope that it will also be remembered as the century of reason. I hope that the coming century will be the one in which humanity finally abandons some of the misguided beliefs and mistaken practices that have promoted violence, increased poverty, and illness and generally endanger our planet for many years. In the allegory of the cave, one of the most famous passages of the Republic, the great philosopher Plato tells us of a group of humans who live in an underground den, chained into place so that all they can see are shadows of reality cast upon the cave wall. What they believe to be truth and justice and good and evil are actually shapes cast by a flickering flame. My friends, I can tell you that nothing casts a more distorted shadow upon a shadow than a weapon. Hold upon a weapon before the fire, and people will see all sorts of shapes on the wall beyond. They might see the shadow of freedom. They might see the shadow of their national sovereignty. I'm here to argue that if only we could cast off our chains and turn around, if only we could see in the clear light of day the object that is casting such a terrible shadow, we would understand that in reality, a weapon is nothing more and nothing less than a man-made object that has consumed too many of our resources and taken too many of our lives. It is a product that must be made, sold, and, of course, used with the utmost caution and prudence. It is an object whose tremendous hold over our imaginations as a human race has stood in the way of human development for far too long. For how else can we explain a world in which we have all the resources we need to end the worst suffering of our fellow man, but we refuse to use that power? How else can we explain a world in which we know which investments will support human development, but we refuse to make those investments? How else can we explain a world in which we spend $1.75 trillion on our militaries in 2012 alone, when preventable diseases kill 200 children every hour? When millions are denied the education that should be their birthright? When a disease like malaria kills 800,000 people a year, despite the fact that its eradication is both possible and affordable? How else can we explain a world in which the unchecked flow of weapons into developing nations kills millions, but we refuse to take action even when a solution is at hand? How else can we explain a world in which we cling in the name of safety to nuclear warheads that can destroy us many times over? There are two ways to explain such a world. One is that we simply do not care about our fellow man. I cannot accept such an explanation, so I must believe in the alternative, that humankind simply does not see clearly what must be done. We are prisoners watching shadows on the wall. I'm here today to ask you to help drive away the shadows. We must shine the light of reason into the darkness, revealing humankind's distorted beliefs about weapons and war, the myths, the legends, untruths, and misunderstandings that have guided our policy and priorities. I want to tell you about three shadows in particular that deserve to be destroyed. First, we must drive away the shadow of our ridiculous military spending. The world's richest nations have the power in their hands to make reductions in their military budgets and honor their commitment to meaningful foreign aid. It may appear naive to make such an argument at a time when so many countries face legitimate threats to their security. But conflicts are always a symptom, not the root cause. Poverty, illiteracy, and oppression are the basis for conflict. Addressing those conditions is not a distraction from the work of keeping the world safe. It is an integral part of keeping the world safe. Imagine the impact on security of reducing poverty by half. Imagine the impact on security of universal primary education. Imagine the impact on security of drastic reductions in hunger and sickness. These changes would take power from dictators and terrorists in ways that weapons never could, and they could be achieved with small reductions in current world military spending. Anyone who makes this argument year after year must be prepared to serve as the voice that cries in the wilderness. But I have always believed that if something is worth doing, its unpopularity should not affect the energy we devote to promoting it. I will continue to make this argument before anyone who will listen as long as I can, as long as I have the strength to speak, for I believe it is the only way for us to achieve lasting peace. Second, we must drive away the shadow of the absurd belief that there is something wrong with regulating the trade of weapons. The amount of our military spending is only one part of our problem. The other part is the destination of those arms. I am speaking of the unchecked flow of small arms and light weapons from one country to another, often from the world's leading arms exporters to developing countries where those weapons will cause untold havoc. This was a problem I first encountered after Central America signed the peace accords that ended its violent conflicts in 1987. Despite our achievement, we found that the responsible sale of arms to our region in the previous decades had done its damage. For years after arms suppliers channeled weapons to armies or paramilitary forces during the 1980s, those weapons were found in the hands of the gangs that roamed the countryside of Nicaragua, or of teenage boys on the streets of San Salvador and Tegucigalpa. Other weapons were shipped to guerrilla or paramilitary groups, as well as to drug cartels in Colombia, ready to destroy yet more lives. We learned the hard way that a shipment of weapons into a developing country is like a virus in a crowded room. It cannot be contained. We do not know whom it will attack, and it can spread in ways we would never have imagined. The weapons sold today might end up in anyone's hands tomorrow. The only certainty is those consequences will be out of our control, and they will be violent. In 1997, along with other Nobel Peace Laureates, I began an effort to establish a comprehensive arms trade treaty which would prohibit the transfer of arms to states, groups, or individuals if sufficient reason exists to believe that those arms will be used to violate human rights or international law. It is an idea whose time has come, and I am delighted to tell you that the world appears to agree. After more than 15 years of very hard work, The Arms Trade Treaty was finally approved at the United Nations last year. It regulates the global trade in tanks, armored combat vehicles, large caliber weapons, combat aircrafts, attack helicopters, warships, missiles and launchers, small arms and light weapons. To be honest with you, I never thought I would see this treaty become a reality in my lifetime. I never thought that I would get to see the idea that first took shape so many years ago become a part of international law. I never thought that I would be able to say that because of the efforts of so many people everywhere, particularly in the developing world, will now be less likely to be the victims of violent crime perpetrated by weapons that should never have been sold. There is much left to do. More than 100 countries, including the United States of America, have now signed the treaty, but it will not enter into force until 50 countries choose to ratify it, and only 11 have done so to date. To quote the New York Times editorial board, which has urged the prompt implementation of the treaty, final ratification could take years, and it would be a travesty if it does. In this century of Asia, leadership from this part of the world is badly needed if we are to avoid this travesty. I have often spoken on behalf of the treaty in nations that lead the globe in the export of conventional weapons. Today, I have come to the other side of the world and the other side of the arms trade, because Asia is home to all 5 of the world's largest importers of weapons: India, China, Pakistan, South Korea, and Singapore. Of those 5, South Korea is the only one that has signed the Arms Trade Treaty, and not a single Asian nation has ratified the treaty. India is rightly concerned about conventional weapons getting into the hands of non-state actors capable of violent attacks against civilians and the state. However, I believe that preventing the diversion of arms to these groups starts with transparency of sales between the states. The Arms Trade Treaty will increase India's national security if it is fully and properly implemented, and India's support is crucial if we are to achieve that goal. I urge the government of India to accept its tremendous leadership in this region to turn the tide for the regulation of the arms trade in Asia and the entire world. Regardless of the work still left to do on the Arms Trade Treaty, our success in achieving the approval has given me new hope. It is the greatest contribution to humanity that my country has made to date. It is also powerful proof that hope can win the day, and that the forces of reason and kindness have many allies. Armed with this new hope, I have found the energy to revisit the third and final shadow we must destroy if we hope to create a safer world. It is the most challenging and complex of the 3, but it is something all of humanity calls on us to accomplish. The shadow I refer to is the nuclear threat under which we all live every single day. I visited the United Nations during my first presidential term in the 1980s. In those days, we spoke of a world without nuclear warheads, a world in which we would finally control the weapons that feed wars between brothers. I returned in my second term, 20 years later, like a modern-day Rip Van Winkle, to find that everything had changed except that. Nuclear weapons continue to exist despite all our promises. While we sleep, death is awake. Death keeps watch over the warehouses that store more than 17,000 nuclear warheads, like 17,000 eyes open and waiting for a moment of carelessness. Death is incited and spurred on by those who perfect weapons of mass destruction instead of destroying them, and those who each year assign dozens of billions of dollars to vertical proliferation. Death is courted by fundamentalists and megalomaniacs, radicals and populists who sustain their power because of their gunpowder. For many years, I have been one of a large group of Nobel Peace Laureates who lobby for the total abolition of nuclear weapons, because we believe they go against the survival instinct of any species. It is up to us to ensure that 20 years from now, we do not awaken to the same terrors we suffer today. The scholar Ward Wilson argues that many of our beliefs about nuclear weapons are based on mistruths and misunderstandings, as if we were prisoners in Socrates' cave. When we cast the light of day upon the idea that nuclear weapons ended World War II, that they prevent aggressive behavior, and that they are responsible for the fact that we have not endured another world war, we see that the historical record provides room to doubt. As Ward writes, until we can be completely certain that nuclear weapons ensure peace, it is reckless to risk the lives of millions of people on a hunch. The path to abolishing these weapons is as difficult as any path humanity has traveled. However, a principle that has guided my life as a peacemaker is that the only way to begin is to begin. In the words of Robert Frost, the best way out is always through. I have called upon the United States to begin the journey through this problem by significantly reducing its arsenal and creating a real path towards disarmament. But if this is the century of Asia, leadership for a change can, should, and will also come from leaders in the East. I'm not the only one who prays daily for a tipping point in the quest to ensure that international law reflects the best and not the worst of humanity. I hope we will all be able one day to look back on this decade as the one in which the leaders of humanity finally accepted their responsibility to ensure that their children and grandchildren can sleep in peace. It was Jawaharlal Nehru himself who said, "Without peace, all other dreams vanish and are reduced to ashes." Our goals of human development, of prosperity, of equality, and of democracy will come to nothing if we cannot address the issues I have outlined today. My dear friends, these calls for peace can be a lonely business. Sometimes For those of us who repeat them year after year, it seems we're doomed to a fate that Tagore also described. The song that I came to sing remains unsung to this day. I have spent my days in stringing and in unstringing my instrument. The time has not come true. The words have not been rightly set. Only there is the agony of wishing in my heart. The blossom has not opened. Only the wind is sighing by. Yes, peace remains the unsung song. The blossom has not opened to reveal the full potential of human achievement. The shadows of war, the misguided priorities of the past continue to hinder our human development. But I believe that we will correct this. I even dare to dream that we are standing at the dawn of a century of reason, a century in which the light of day drives out the shadows of the past. If this is true, the nations of Asia will preside over this change. As I close, I would like to return to the words with which we began. Who are you, reader, reading my poems 100 years hence? I do not compare my words to the immortal verses of Tagore, but I do wonder what the citizens of the future will think of the goals of those who came before them. I do wonder what the future citizens of India, of Costa Rica, and of every country will think of our dreams of a world that places its students ahead of its militaries, of a world that treats the trade of weapons with the strict control it deserves, of a world in which the nuclear threat no longer hangs above us. When they open their doors and look abroad, will they be glad that we had such a vision? Will they be grateful that they have never known such fear and worry? Will they be proud that they can say that humankind has now overcome the nightmare of violence which prevented us for so long from feeding our hungry and healing our sick? Who are you, reader, reading our words 100 years hence? Are you standing free and peaceful in a world governed by reason and justice? With every breath in my body, I pray that it may be so. Thank you very much.
After a long time, we have heard a passionate appeal for peace. With shadows, as it were, of Gandhiji, who, as you know, all his life worked for peace. Even in the height of the anti-colonial movement, he was always against violence. And Señor Sanchez has pointed out the tragic situation that in a world which is still full of malnutrition, of poverty, of illness, of deprivation, where 2 billion people live on or below the poverty line, where we have the resources, if we use them wisely, to ensure for every human being the necessary inputs for a decent, civilized existence. But we do not use it. There are, my friends, 2 scenarios for the future of the human race. Arthur Koestler, the European philosopher, held that the human race was a race programmed for self-extinction. because he says there's an engineering defect in the cortex, whereby the thinking and the feeling elements in the human beings are not properly integrated. Therefore, although we feel we know what should be done, we do not do it. As Duryodhana says in the Mahabharata, Janami dharmam nacha pe pravritti, janami adharmam nacha me nivritti. I know what is right, but I am not attracted to it. I know what is wrong, but I am attracted to it. So Costa says that because of this engineering defect in the human cortex, sooner or later the human race is bound to blow itself up. And the way things are going, the stockpiling of nuclear weapons, a tiny fraction of which can blow the world up into smithereens, seems to support that theory. There is another scenario that put forward by the great evolutionary philosopher Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo postulates that the human race is a race destined for evolution. He says that evolution has not completed its work with the human race. In the same way as life has evolved from mineral to vegetable to animal to the human race, it will not stop its evolution. The human being is only an intermediate creature between the animal and the divine. Human race is a work in progress. And according to Sri Aurobindo, we can, if we so desire, move on to a new level of consciousness, individual and collective, in which the shadows that Senor Sanchez speaks about will finally disappear. Now the jury is out on which one of these two scenarios will prevail. It is good that we have, in the midst of so many hawks, we have one man at least whose words, whose appeal for sanity, for compassion, for understanding, for karuna, are still ringing in our ears. How far he succeeds remains to be seen. Maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe 100 lifetimes later. But I think that those of us who are alive at this stage in human history have a responsibility, not only to ourselves, not only to our nations, but to the human race. Because in our tradition, we have the concept of the world as a family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And if the world is a family, you cannot have a world in which 1 billion people die of overeating and 2 billion people die of malnourishment. That's not how a family functions. Therefore, we have got to see whether India can once again recover, because there are so many hawks nowadays in this country. If you listen to some of our television channels, I won't mention anybody, we would be at war today with China, with Maldives, with Bangladesh, and with Sri Lanka all at the same time. So we need countervailing forces. There are the forces of destruction. There are the forces of the armed traffickers, the drug traffickers, most shameful of all, the human traffickers, the forces of disruption, the forces of hatred, the forces of fanaticism, the forces of fundamentalism. Against that, we need a new coalition, a coalition of those who are committed to human welfare, who are committed to preventing environmental destruction, which is a fourth shadow which I might add, Senor, to what you have said. The way the environment has been destroyed in the last 100 years is something horrific. We look upon Mother Earth as a living being, Bhavani Vasundhara, Gaia, not as something to be exploited and despoiled. So these are the sort of people. We want environmentalists, we want peace activists, we want people who have got a sense of compassion. But above all, I'm not giving an alternative lecture, although I will one day if you want me to. It's a lovely subject. I hope, first of all, that this lecture will be widely circulated, because if it is recorded, as I'm sure it will be, I think we have to get it across as many people as possible so that they read an alternative scenario. But one final point I would like to end with, Senor. We believe that finally the light that you are talking about to dispel the shadows will not necessarily come from reason, but will come from the spiritual light within, will come from intuition, will come from spiritual growth. Every religion speaks about the light. The Bible talks of the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. The Muslims talk of the Noor-e Ruhani. The Sikhs talk of the Ego Onkara. The Hindus talk Vedaham etam purusham mahantam aditya varadam tamasa parastat. I have seen that great being shining like 1,000 suns beyond the darkness. Unless we are able to contact that light within us, our reason by itself, I am sorry to say, has led us to where we are today. Therefore, we don't only need reason. We need reason illuminated by a spiritual light. Thank you very much, sir, for your lecture. May I ask Mr. Asthana now formally.
Thank you. Thank you.
Honorable Speaker, President Oscar Arias, Honorable President ICCR, Dr. Karan Singh, ladies and gentlemen, I should like to thank the Honorable Speaker, President Oscar Arias, for sharing his thoughts with us regarding the reason and its place in the human life. As he has said that reason is an integral part and it is applicable to many walks of life. President Arias has been twice elected as the President of Costa Rica, and his efforts to end the Central American crisis and his pacifism are well known, and for which he received the Nobel Peace Prize. He was also awarded the Albert Schweitzer Prize for Humanitarianism, which he used to establish the Arias Foundation for Peace and Human Progress, which is active in a number of philanthropic fields, including promoting equal opportunities for women in all sectors of the Central American society. He has also authored a number of books on political and historical subjects. India also believes in universal nuclear disarmament. Former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1988 had put forward a plan for universal nuclear disarmament way back in 1988.
That plan didn't receive the attention. Yeah.
And we do hope that sooner or later the dream of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi will come true. And as Dr. Singh said, as human beings evolve and perhaps we'll become more amenable to reason as we learn from our mistakes. And so let us hope that what we put forward, what India put forward in 1988 will be realized sooner rather than later. I have just returned from a stint in Latin America. I served in Mexico, where I saw for myself that, as the Honorable Speaker said, now distance is no bar in developing closer relationship. And India, I was happy to see, is held in high regard in Latin America, and many Indian leaders are well known and well regarded in Latin America. And so with these words, I would like to thank also the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library for organizing this lecture in association with ICCR. ICCR looks forward to working together with the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.